As a women's health professional, you already know the value in cycle tracking, but are you equipped to support your clients with complex cycle issues? Do you know how to read complex menstrual cycle charts? Were you ever taught specific step-by-step protocols to deal with irregular bleeding patterns, abnormal cervical mucus, chaotic basal body temperatures, and progesterone issues? That's where FAMM comes in. The Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship Program is designed specifically for women's health professionals with busy practices. We've cut out all the fluff so we can be laser focused on what you need to serve your clients better. Registration is now open for the next class of FAMM. Classes start toward the end of June, and early bird registration is open until June 14th. Apply today at fertilityfriday.com/FAMMlive. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 525. Today I'm sharing a brand new episode in my FAMM Practitioner series. I'm sharing my interview with Isobel, and we get into a number of different topics from PMS to contraception to fertility awareness and everything in between. So before we jump in, I'll tell you a little bit about Isobel. Isobel is a fertility awareness educator through NFPTA and a yoga nidra facilitator. She helps women and menstruators with complicated cycles to avoid pregnancy naturally, whilst overcoming menstrual cycle issues holistically. Using her deep personal experience with cycling and the tools of fertility awareness and hormonal health coaching, she provides women with the same transformation she had from disempowerment and despair to true freedom. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's episode with Isobel. And I'm excited to be here today with Isobel Ripley. At the time that we are recording, we have been in the program together for almost 9 months. Like we're almost in month 9, which is really, really crazy that it's gone so fast. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Isobel.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's good to be here. I can't believe it's been 9 months.
I know. It feels like we started not that long ago.
It's flown by.
But I mean, a lot has happened since then. I'm sure if we reflect back on all the sessions, all the different topics that we've gone through, it's probably like, okay, sure. I guess it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, thinking back to the first session, that does feel a long time ago.
Yeah. But I mean, I thoroughly enjoy the program. So I always find that it to me, it always feels like it goes by really fast. And there's different aspects of the program. So like the first half, we're really diving into the how to do all the things. And then the second half is the practical aspect. And I feel like it really flies by when you're in the midst of your client work. So I don't know if that's been your experience, but that has been my experience as instructor.
Yes, I think it does kind of start speeding up, I guess, because you're just in the swing of things and you're like, okay, now I'm doing my clients and I'm into it.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to start by giving you the opportunity to introduce yourself to the audience. So I love to ask the question, how old were you when you had your first period? And I like to ask that as a way to kind of lead us into what you're doing now. So I'd love for you just to share a little bit about your own experience with your cycles, how you discovered fertility awareness charting, how you got into the work that you're doing now, and I suppose what inspired you to kind of jump into FAMM as a way to increase your fertility awareness knowledge and everything.
So I was about 14, I think, when I got my first period, and I was the last of all my friends, nearly, and by that point, very ready to have it. Although about 3 months before, or just a few months before, I was like, no, I really don't want it to come. Don't let it come. So I switched quite quickly. I guess I must have sensed that it was coming and just been ready. And I have 2 sisters, an older and a younger sister. And for each of our menarche, my mum has really ritualized the event. And she's done this box for each of us where over the year or so before our first period, she got all of the women from our family and community who wanted to put in a little gift or like a little message or something for us. And so then she presented us with this box and all these gifts on when we told her that we got our period. And I think that was really a significant thing for me, because I came into it with a sense of this is something to celebrate, and it never felt from the beginning like a burden necessarily, although I was a dancer and I hated that I had to wear these big ugly pads. And so, yeah, interestingly, I still felt that I got kind of from the culture of the periods are a burden. I got a bit of that, especially through the dance world. And I was very quick to like use tampons and just try and hide it up. And then I also went on birth control quite early, like age 16. But even so, I think that experience with my mum has been there all along. And I do think that's a thread of what, when I kind of decided to come off all of the hormonal birth control, I returned to that and I was like, oh yeah, this is an incredible, magical, powerful thing, and I want to reconnect to it. So then I reconnected really strong. And my experience with hormonal birth control was not great, ranging from the kind of mild just feeling of, why am I taking this pill every day and feeling a bit disconnected, to some really severe side effects with my mental health when I was on the Nuva ring, and massive changes in my body, which were kind of unprecedented shifts that really threw me. And I sometimes say that I have been doing a kind of informal hormonal birth control study since I was like 14, because I used to be an actor for doctor exams. So I would go in and I would have this, what do you call it, a scenario that I would have to act out that I was this girl going in for who really needed to be put on hormonal contraception. So from a very young age, I was hearing all these doctors like telling me this is the options. And so I thought I was an expert. So when I got to my opportunity to go into the doctor, I really knew what I wanted. And so I felt quite empowered, and I felt like I could go in and say, no, this is what I'm having, give me this. So I've always felt quite empowered around birth control, or even though there was those difficult experiences. So then when I finally decided to come off all of it completely, it was like final. I was not going on hormonal medical birth control ever again, because I was just done with all of those experiences. But I remember having the thought, what the hell am I going to do? Because there's no other option. And so, sure, I'm just going to have to be irresponsible now. Or like, there was this sense that it was irresponsible of me to come off of it all and not have a plan. And I was very lucky to come across the book Period Power by Maisie Hill, which I think is quite a gateway for a lot of women. And in that book, it talks about FAMM. And so I just latched onto it and I was like, this is my thing. I'm going to do it. I'm going to make this work for me. So I really struggled at that time to find a teacher. I think maybe now it's a little bit easier, but I do still get clients coming to me who are like, I was searching forever, especially in the UK, maybe. There aren't a huge amount of teachers, as far as I'm aware. And so I've eventually found someone who was teaching the FEMM method. And I just fell in love with it completely. And it was much more than just the birth control method. It taught me about myself. It taught me about my emotions. My cyclical experience was validated. So I no longer thought that I was, broken when I would have this big energy shift after ovulation. And it helped me understand my relationships and why for 2 weeks I started not wanting to be around my boyfriend or things like that. And it just blew my mind. And I was so passionate about sharing it with other people. And so for a while, I kind of wove it together with my dance work because I was training as a professional dancer. So there were connections that I was making around kind of body literacy and body awareness. So I was doing that for a while and not feeling confident in sharing in really sharing around fertility, because so I was really sticking into just the like cycle syncing and cycle awareness. But then I found over and over again that there were just really significant misunderstandings that women were having around just the education piece. Like, what is ovulation actually? How many days does ovulation happen? Like, is it a week of ovulation? And then I just started getting a bit frustrated because I really just wanted to do that education piece, but I wanted to take my own education further. So I did the Natural Family Planning Teachers Association course. So I got my FAMM certification. And for a while it was good and it was going well. And then I just felt that I was not capable of dealing with the complicated cycles that were coming in to me. And so when I saw that your program was kind of filling this gap in my knowledge potentially of, okay, I can teach someone the birth control rules if their cycle is somewhat regular, and I really don't know what to do if someone comes in with something out of the ordinary, and that's most people. And so now I'm here, and I do feel that it has completely turned my understanding like on its head, and in a good way, and really boosted my confidence massively. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's very exciting. And I always love how in such a short span of time we can essentially get like maybe over a couple decades of your life, you know? So there's a few things that I wanted to go back to. One small thing for anyone who isn't familiar with the NAFTA. Do you want to just share what that is? Like your
The
training?
NFPTA.
Yeah.
Yes, so NFPTA is a certification to teach fertility awareness method, symptothermal method. And it's I messed that up.
No, it's okay. But not everyone would be familiar with it. And I think it's based in the UK, correct?
Yeah, it's based in the UK.
Yeah. So it's one of the options for women who are looking to become fertility awareness educators, essentially.
Yeah, and I chose it because it was UK based, and I felt for some reason that I wanted to do a UK based thing, although myself, I'm not even based in the UK anymore. So
Well, I mean, it makes sense to go in where you are. So maybe just briefly, it's partly due to my curiosity as well. How long was the program, and like what were your favorite things? Like what were you like super confident, equipped to do after you completed, and like what were some of the areas that you felt less confident?
I think it was 6 months. I actually can't really remember how long it was now, but it was definitely a few months. If I'm very honest, I didn't learn more than I already knew because I was using FEMM in my own practice. So it was more that I felt then qualified to teach a fertility awareness method. It was slightly different to FEMM, but I think it's hard to remember now because I'm not using those methods anymore, but I think they're similar, FAMM and NFPTA methods, in the way that they do cervical mucus. So kind of the 3 categories, and they have R's on their charts and the words rather than numbers. Yeah. And I felt great. My first few clients after I did that certification, I was just so thrilled to be able to share this with people, and had some really lovely clients at the beginning who really helped me learn about teaching and everything. But I felt that, it didn't fully equip me, as I was saying, in like different situations. And I think the mucus aspect It's funny because with our method, with your method, it's people always say like, oh, this at first seems quite complicated and people feel that it's maybe overwhelming. But it wasn't really, I don't feel like it was until I learned the FAMM method that I really understood mucus, because the categorization, when it's more basic, there's more room for ifs and buts and maybes. So it was very interesting switching methods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, thanks for that. It's helpful because yeah, there's lots of different training options now, which is great. Like it's really good that there's so many different training options, but I didn't because it's in the UK, I don't know how many listeners would be familiar with that NFPTA. So you said something really interesting that I want to go back to. You said that your mom made you a menstrual box when you had your first period, and I just thought that that was the most wonderful thing. And also, I just wanted to comment over all the years of doing interviews. I mean, sometimes a person's mom makes an effort and makes a big deal of something and it's not well received. So I've also had conversations where it's like, you know, my mom made this big deal about it and I was mortified, like I had this party or whatever, and it was well intentioned, but maybe not necessarily as well received. But in your case, it seems like you really loved it. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that? Because it sounds amazing.
Yeah, I did have a slight element of a strange feeling of like, oh, does this mean that all these women know that I've started my first period, and a little vulnerability around that? But at the same time, it was okay because I felt very held, and I suppose it's a testament to my, yeah, to the environment that my mum created around it, and also our relationship, I suppose. But I definitely did have a slight element of like, whoa, this is a lot and this is overwhelming, in that tenderness of like, oh, does this mean I have to be a woman now? And feeling really uncomfortable with that word and not ready for that. And yeah, so it wasn't completely straightforward. But now looking back, I'm so grateful. And I would do something, I'd definitely do something similar for my own daughter if I was to have one. But I think it would be different. It would be my own take on it. And it might be a little bit more on the education side, maybe, because I didn't get any of that. It was more the emotional side. So yeah.
That's really interesting as well. I mean, I always think of where we are at right now, right, with our knowledge, have, you know, with you having gone through the FAM program and me being in this field for all those years, there's no reasonable expectation that our mothers could have had this level of information to share with us, you know. So I always look back on their attempts at sharing what they knew and I think fondly of it. I've had a lot of time to think about that. And my mom really, she didn't know any of this stuff that I'm teaching. She knew some basic information, but she really did her best to share with me in that way. So it's really interesting to hear you say like it was nice and it satisfied that emotional piece, but there was not really any education there. So, and I feel like that's what you had is very unique because it's not something that I hear a lot. We'll probably hear more of that as we continue to get older and more women become aware. But just wanted to say that to you, Isobel. I feel like that was a really special thing that your mom did and kind of like she's like before her time. You know what I mean? Like she's kind of
Yeah, thanks for
pioneer.
acknowledging. She'll love it. She'll listen to this. She'll be happy.
Yeah, good job, Mom.
And my older sister is now a midwife. So I wonder as well, you know, there's obviously something in our family that is very curious and drawn to these things. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I imagine that, yeah, I'm currently what's happening in my mind, if anyone's curious, is that because I often ask these questions and have had so many of these conversations, it's kind of a mixed bag. You know, some women have a really positive experience, I suppose, with their cycles, but I wouldn't say that it's as common. I think it's more common for women to have a bit more of a complicated experience with their first cycle for a variety of reasons. And some feel supported, some don't necessarily feel supported, don't get like any information at all. Some start bleeding at 10 or 9. And I've consistently found that women who are at that age when they started to bleed are more likely to just be kind of a little bit traumatized, or like it's just, they're so young, my sons are 8 and 11 at the time that I'm recording. And though they are boys, it's hard to imagine an 11-year-old, right? Like dealing with it. But obviously we know that
Yeah.
that happens. So anyway, so just some thoughts that I'm sharing because it's actually really refreshing, and it's just not every day that I speak to someone who had such a positive experience. And one other thing I wanted to say about that was that I started menstruating around the same time. So I've really tried to like work out the details, and I was either 14 or I was just before my 14th birthday. So I think it was probably that, because I remember it was like October. I have a funny story about it. Like I started bleeding. I was sitting in a church because my classmates were being confirmed. And I went to a Catholic school. So I always think it's funny that I started bleeding in church. And then I went back to my friend's place after this, and on the TV was like Hunt for Red October, and it was like October, you know. It was like fun. So I don't know. It's a nice silly story for the day. And then my birthday's in November. So I've kind of figured out like it was probably 13, but I was probably just about to be 14. So similarly to what you said, like I had a lot of time to think about it, and a lot of my friends had already started menstruating. I was one of the last, and so I was quite ready in that sense. And I think that in and of itself makes a different experience compared to other women who start bleeding first or younger than everybody else.
Yeah, definitely. And looking back, I think I was so active as well. Like I was dancing so much, and I think that, I mean, I'm quite lucky actually that it came at 14 rather than, it can really push it back if you're so active. But yeah, I feel there's no baggage there for me, which is really, like you say, is not always the case. And the thing I really had to come to terms with, and my challenge with my cycle, has been my premenstrual phase. And I feel that what my mum was lucky in that she never had any menstrual cycle issues. She just kind of sailed through her menstruating years, no hormonal birth control. Well, actually, maybe once. Actually, yeah, I mean, maybe she would say she had issues. But when I was really struggling with PMS, we didn't think it was that. We thought that I had bipolar at one point, because my mum no one really around me could see the pattern that was happening. And looking back now, and if I have a daughter or something like that, I'm so clued into that cycle that I just think it would be so obvious to me, but it just really wasn't at the time.
Yeah, it's hard to hear that you kind of go to that extreme before looking at, could this be related to the cycle and could this be something else? But it's so common. It also made me think of one of the kind of scary stats that I shared in the fifth vital sign, and it was around teenage girls. So teenage girls who were put on the pill were far more likely to be diagnosed with depression and put on antidepressants. And and that's happening before anyone's asking the question of, could there be a link between depression and contraceptives? Because we know that the pill is associated with an increased risk of, they call it, quote, mood changes, but that includes depression and anxiety to panic attacks to all kinds of problematic situations. So the need for the education is definitely there. So I don't know if you want to share a little bit about that, what your experience was like with your cycle. I mean, now you know that it was PMDD, but maybe share with us what that was like and what your symptoms were like, such that people around you thought it could be bipolar.
So I've not been officially diagnosed with PMDD. I, for some time, started going down that route with my doctors and talking to them about that, but I withdrew myself from going there because I wanted to kind of first do the piece around really accepting myself as I was, and just seeing if I could actually change how I was relating to that time before I kind of thought more about this is something, this is a, I don't know, that labeling thing, I felt quite resistant to, because I didn't want to kind of put myself in a box with that at the time. I suppose it was worse when I was at uni. So I went to a dance school, which was 5 days a week, like 9 to 5, very physical, very exhausting, traveling like an hour to get there across London every morning and back. And I would just have massive breakdowns, like, yeah, not able to really function. And I think I would function, like I was functioning, but I was really pushing myself and pushing through a real big lack of energy and lack of motivation and kind of apathy. And it was so scary, because I just thought, do I not care about what I'm doing? Do I not love what I'm doing? Do I not care about my friends and my partner? And so I started talking to other people who had been diagnosed with mental health issues, such as bipolar. And I was seeing myself in that because of the big shifts that I was experiencing. But I think, looking back, if I'd been tracking my cycles, I would have seen that it was actually only happening on a couple of days each cycle, but it felt so big that I was focusing completely on those. And that's what's been transformative about actually tracking, is that you can't then just focus on the bad, because you're also seeing the days where, oh, actually, I'm fine on that day. So, yeah. And I really benefited a lot from, we just had in the program Alexandra Pope and Shani Hugo Wurlitzer come and talk. And I really benefited from their book, Wild Power, because it helped me just reframe my experience and see myself as powerful. And like, wow, because those emotions are so powerful. And now I'm just at the point where I'm like, wow, I'm really sensitive to this cyclical consciousness, as they were saying in the talk. And that is really a gift. And at the same time, when really, it's been in the last year, actually, and coming on the program with you, figuring out actually that physical side of things and looking back at my charts from when I was having those experiences and being like, yes, a 9-day luteal phase. Interesting. And I now really focus on eating well, eating much more than I was before, eating much more when I'm active, and it's made a massive difference. So I feel like I'm kind of holding the two things as to be true, that like it's okay for me to have these really intense emotional experiences, because that is just life and that's part of who I am, and I can really go there into that like dark space, and I can really support myself and help myself to ease that experience. And so it doesn't not happen any time now. Like sometimes it still happens, but I feel that there's a level that I'm nourished at and well, that allows me to move through that a lot quicker and to really bounce back and see it as kind of not this problem with me, or, terrible thing that needs to be fixed, because it's so much more contained now when it happens, and it's kind of, much, much better than it was.
Attention, women's health professionals. The next round of FAMM is just around the corner. FAMM is the perfect program for busy women's health professionals who want to offer fertility awareness charting support in their practice. FAMM cuts out all the fluff and focuses only on what you need to serve your clients better. Each module, homework assignment, in-class training, and chart review session is there for a reason. Where will you be 9 months from now? With a FAMM certification, you'll have a brand new skill set that will allow you to use the menstrual cycle as a diagnostic tool and vital sign in your practice. Your confidence in analyzing and interpreting menstrual cycle charts will be at a level you can't even imagine today. And you'll have a brand new offering in your business that will allow you to reach more clients. This knowledge is truly life-changing. Transform your practice in 9 months. You won't regret it. Join us this year in FAMM. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAMMlive to apply today. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMlive. And now it's time to get back to today's episode. I love that. I love that on so many levels. I think one of my goals, or like that kind of like it's not a secret, like my secret master plan, right, is to empower our FAMM practitioners to move past that kind of beginner level understanding the menstrual cycle as a vital sign. Like it's nice to say and it's nice to understand in a more general sense, but when you're in the program and you're able to work with the material and chart your own cycles and kind of go through this process yourself over that 9 months together, I find that once you're charting for a few years with this knowledge, like a year or more, I could say, with this knowledge, then you move to a bit of a different place. And so when I think about what excites me, what I hear from my practitioners once they've kind of moved through that process, is that now we understand the cycle more when you have a shorter luteal phase. So you did work really hard to increase up those luteal phases so that they were not simply 9 days. And just based on the conversation that we're having a 9-day luteal is obviously an indication of lower progesterone, which is associated with a higher rate of PMS. And so that physical kind of scientific aspect of it is coming into play there. And when you start to incorporate this knowledge and see those shifts, obviously it shows you like, wow, I have the power to make these shifts myself. Like there's a lot that I can do to improve my hormones. But if in the future you had a really stressful cycle or something were to take place and you did have, a 9-day luteal, although it could be a little alarming, right? Like, wow, I haven't had one of these for a while. I would hope that now you're in a different stage of it where it wouldn't be this shock or surprise. You would look back at your cycle and say, wow, this was going on this month. This was going on this month. And ultimately, the place that I love when my practitioners are able to get to is when you're really dancing with the cycle. So when we're really putting this concept of the vital sign in action, we're no longer terrified whenever there's a fluctuation. It no longer has that same weight. We're now able to take that as information. And it always helps us to course correct because now you know what it feels like to feel really good. And so once you slip off that path, we're human beings, right? Things happen. You're able to course correct and get back. And this is, of course, also our wish for our clients. You know what I mean? Like as we jump into our FAMM processes, like in my mind, I'm thinking, this is how we help women everywhere. We start like one woman at a time and then share this knowledge so that we can just feel better as we're going through. There was something else I wanted to touch on, and this was something that I touched on in the fifth vital sign as well. This concept of there's an old medical term called menstrual molemia, and it refers to it refers to the changes, the cyclical changes that we go through, but not as like a medical problem, because 90% of women experience some level of PMS symptoms. And so if you think about it, if 90% of women were tired after running a marathon, we wouldn't be like, oh my gosh, right? This tired thing is a medical issue. We have to ask ourselves if the vast majority of women experience some level of shifting and changing as they approach their periods, then can we consider it to be a medical problem? So I feel like you really expressed it really succinctly when you said that, now you are accepting that there are these fluctuations. We do experience shifts in energy and different things as we approach different areas of our cycle. And of course, Alexandra Pope and Shawnee Hugo Wurlitzer in their book Wild Power really just delve into that beautifully. So if this is something that interests you and you haven't yet had an opportunity to read their book, and we can also link our previous episodes together to today's episode for the listeners, because it really is a beautiful concept. But it's not to say that we're saying it's all okay. Like there's a level where there is some normal fluctuation that we can expect to experience. But there's also a level where it's like not okay. And when it starts to affect your day-to-day life, when it starts to be really problematic, when you find it hard to get out of bed or hard to function or hard to go to work or any of those things, then that is not normal, you know? And so there's that like common versus normal, acknowledging that it is a natural shift in phase, but we're not saying that it's okay to be like in abject misery or anything like that.
Yeah. And I have to say, I found it difficult. There was a period of a few months where I felt like it was really hard for me to marry those two things. And especially that there's something also going on culturally around the premenstrual phase where it starts to become a bit taboo to say the word PMS or to talk about symptoms and around the premenstrual phase, because we're at the same time trying to normalize that there is that shift. And as you're saying, so for a while I felt like in this weird sticky place. And I have to say, actually, having Shani and Alexandra on in the FAMM program for their guest lecture, that was like a moment of, it's like all coming together for me. Like, it's okay to do all of it and have all of it, and that all be a part of the picture.
Mm-hmm. Well, and as you know, I tend to focus on a lot of those tangible aspects of it because what I like about the focus on the menstrual cycle is that, so Isobel, if you were hypothetically experiencing some kind of, mild symptoms or mild to moderate, one of the ways that we can determine whether or not it's normal is to quite literally look at your menstrual cycle and determine if it's generally falling into those parameters. So once you are, like you said, matching your intake of food to your activity level, like once you're addressing, we always talk about in our FAMM program, our foundational factors. So when we kind of put those FAMM protocols in place, you're on top of a lot of those things. When we see that your luteal phases are lengthening, when we basically see that overall it's meeting those parameters, we see some improvement. And from that, in context, if you have a client who's in a similar situation, just by seeing that the menstrual cycle is in more normal parameters now, and then when she shares her symptoms, if the cycle is truly healthy, they will be more mild. And that helps us to determine also what's a bit more normal. So I definitely like that marriage between the emotional aspect of it and acknowledging it with the physical aspect, with the actual chart, because then together we're not normalizing stuff that isn't normal, right? I think that's the risk when you want to really get into that emotional piece and like, yes, we're supposed to feel more tired and we're supposed to, right? We're supposed to go more inward at this time and whatever, which is fair. But we also, I think it helps us to balance it because then we're seeing that the symptoms are matching what we're seeing and we have checks and balances there. So yeah, like I love the concept, but I think because I've worked with so many women over the years, there's a risk of normalizing what isn't normal if we're not paying attention to what's actually happening in the cycle. So I think it's really important to have both of those pieces. So, I mean, as we start bringing our interview to a close, one of the questions I always like to ask our practitioners who are on the show is, for somebody who is in a similar situation to you, I mean, you had already received a fertility awareness educator certification. You were already seeing clients. And for someone who's in a similar position where they're feeling not as confident, especially when the complex charts start flowing, and like you said, most of them are, because those are often the women who are seeking support. For someone who's thinking about jumping in the program, like what would you want them to know? What would you want them to know about your experience? Just anything you can share, I'm sure would be helpful.
I was a little apprehensive at first because I thought, I already have my fertility awareness certification. Do I need this extra training? Am I just, chasing after more certification to feel ready? But my gut was really right that this is what I needed, because the confidence that I have to really take clients through a process that has such tangible outcomes results is just so valuable. And it's also really rich in terms of structure that you and the way that you model the process and those things that otherwise we just have to work out on our own over like many years of like how many sessions is it going to take to go through this particular thing, and how do I do an intake form, and all of that stuff. It makes me feel very supported, and it is like true mentorship in the way that it's like well-rounded. It's not just where you get your certification to teach fertility awareness and then you kind of off on your own to figure out how you're gonna find people and figure out your programs and stuff. It's really just very well-rounded. So if you are looking for elevation in your practice and your business, you will get that, I think, in maybe places that you didn't even realize you were looking for, like I was with the kind of more business side of things, I suppose.
Yeah, because I know it's interesting because the program has kind of a natural flow, if you will. It's all like menstrual cycle, like the 9 months time frame and like, all the things. But there is this natural progression that I've noticed that happens as we bring practitioners through the program. I mean, the first part of the program has to be dialed into fertility awareness to make sure that we're good with our systems, how we're going to teach clients, the standardized ways of doing that, and, the evidence, the research, all the things. And then once we get into the practical aspect of it and everyone starts looking for clients and securing clients for their practicum, I think naturally the conversation begins to shift more towards some of those business topics. And so certainly that doesn't come up on this podcast a whole lot, but within the program itself, we always have business sessions. We've even had a few business specific guest speakers. We have one coming up she's going to talk about pricing and structuring programs and gaining visibility and all those kinds of things. So we do our best to support our practitioners in all areas. And although the business aspect is not something that we generally advertise and all that, it's part of it. And so it always comes up in the program as well. It doesn't replace any of the important fertility awareness / hormone / it doesn't replace any of those topics, but it certainly is added to that as part of what the questions are, what people need. So I'm glad that you found it so valuable. Well, Isobel, I'd love to give you an opportunity to share a little bit about you. So for anyone who wants to learn more about you, work with you, if you have any exciting things going on, and also if you have any final words or thoughts that you'd like to share, you're more than welcome to do that.
Thanks so much. So my business is called A Better World to Bleed In. It's rather a visionary title, and I just really believe that this work creates a better world for us to bleed in, and in turn a world that's better to bleed in is actually a better world for everyone, because it's a world where we're safe and respected and nurtured. So I am taking on clients. I'm focusing on the avoiding pregnancy piece, and also avoiding pregnancy with those more complex cycles, and so overcoming menstrual cycle issues holistically whilst avoiding pregnancy naturally. And I'm working one-to-one at the moment. I'm living in South Africa at the moment, and so I'm all online, but I would love to welcome more clients if anyone is looking. And do I have anything particularly interesting coming up? Nothing particularly to mention right now. Lots of interesting things.
Always something going on. I mean, it's interesting to me just that you live in South Africa. I mean, maybe one day I'll be able to visit. Certainly have not yet been to any country in Africa, actually. I've never been in that part of the world. But thank you so much for being here today. I'll make sure to share the links to your programs, your website, all the things. So for anyone who's listening on the go, you can find all of that information over in the show notes page. And again, Isobel, thank you so much for being here. This conversation was so rich. We covered so many different aspects, and I'm really excited to share it with the audience.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/525. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode with Isobel. It was such a treat to have her on the show. I absolutely loved our conversation, and I feel like we touched on so many important points. We delved a little bit into the FAMM process and how what we teach in the Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship Training Program is quite different to what women typically are learning in other fertility awareness training programs. As I mentioned in the episode, there's a huge difference between learning how to teach other women how to chart their cycles and learning how to support your clients with hormonal and menstrual cycle issues. And the reason that this training program came about is because when I myself graduated from my training program, I found myself in a very similar situation. I was adept at teaching my clients how to chart their cycles, but my clients overwhelmingly had very difficult, complex, challenging, atypical cycles. And through years of client experience, through years of research and continuing education opportunities, we have really developed an incredible step-by-step process by which you can not only teach your clients charting, but interpret even the most complex advanced charts so that no matter what situation you find yourself in with your clients, you always have a step-by-step methodical way to support them. Regardless of the different symptoms or the different challenging aspects of the cycle that they might present with. You'll find details about our Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship program over at fertilityfriday.com/FAMMlive. That's FAMMLIVE. If you're a women's health professional who is really keen to start up-leveling your work with clients in this way and to be able to really master the menstrual cycle and bring that into your assessment process and truly support your clients in a way that you haven't been able to before, we are starting our next class in July of 2024. If you're listening to this in real time, if you're listening in the future, just head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAMMlive to see when the next class is starting. So if you are still with me towards the end of this episode, first of all, that's amazing. Thank you for listening all the way through. I realize it's been a very, very long time since I've asked, for those of you, if you have been enjoying the podcast, if you are a regular listener and you're a fan of the show, I would love it if you would leave a review of the show on Apple Podcasts. I realize as I say this that I don't think I have asked on the podcast for years. I really don't think I've asked for reviews of the podcast for at least a couple of years. If you're a fan of the show, that's one of the best compliments that you can give. And it's also one of the best ways that you can help others to find the show. If you think about how we interact, whether it's on Amazon or however we do things these days, we do things very differently. If we're looking at a podcast to listen to, if we're looking at a book to buy or a product or something that we need in the house, what do? The first thing we do is go and check out those reviews and see what other people are saying about it. So if you are a fan of the show, I would love it. And I would really, really appreciate it if you would, head over to Apple Podcasts and leave your review there. There's tons of places where you can listen to podcasts these days, but still Apple Podcasts remains one of the top places that people would look forward to check out the reviews. So thank you in advance so much for helping with that. So with that said, I hope you have a wonderful weekend, whenever you're tuning into the show. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting. If you enjoyed today's episode, you are going to love our new resource for women's health professionals, how to interpret virtually any chart your client throws at you. Our new ebook breaks down complex chart interpretation into an easy step-by-step process. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/chart to snag your complimentary copy today. That's fertilityfriday.com/chart.